Awesome. I'm eager to jump into the next topic.
Let's go there now.
And I'm trying to struggle which one. There's so many to choose from. But I think, something you mentioned a bit before about, I guess regulation in general should not be a blocker, you said.
Yeah.
And can you just start to elaborate a bit more? What do you mean with that?
Exactly. I mean, it's so if you are working as an in-house lawyer, for example, it's not fun to be the blocker and just say no. But I think it's...
And I can just share what I said before at the start. When I speak to you or ask you something, I try to avoid saying, is this okay to do? I wouldn't ask that, but instead I would ask, how can we solve this to make this possible?
But now let's start here, and then we have a tips and tricks with your internal lawyer.
Exactly.
How to speak to lawyers.
How to speak to lawyers. Tips and tricks with your privacy officer. Yes. Let's go there.
Exactly. But that's good. But I think what people could do to help out lawyers to be enablers rather than blockers is actually involving them early on.
Early on is a key tip.
Yeah, exactly. Because and it's also more fun as a lawyer to be part early on, because then you can be part of setting the strategy, be proactive, and if one way wouldn't work, then you can suggest another way, rather than come in late saying that, oh my God, this is illegal, you can't do that. That's super boring, and you're being the no-sayer. So be more proactive rather than reactive.
So one of the key strategies is to work with your regulatory topics or lawyering stuff proactively. That's a simple...
Lawyering stuff.
that is simple enough, right?
But I think actually I have to defend the field of... law in some way, because you're putting it down a bit. So I'm going to take the opposite stance a bit now and trying to find a positive and why we need regulation, perhaps.
Definitely. I'm very pro-regulation, especially for the AI field.
And I usually speak the opposite way. I usually speak against regulation because I think so many examples of regulation is bad, but I think without regulation it would be horribly as bad as well.
Yeah.
So there is two extremes. You can think of completely anarchistically, without regulation, and you can think completely over-regulated and a kind of big brother kind of society, which would be also bad. So the real problem is really to find the balance between the two, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not an easy task.
And I think one example, we always love to quote Elon Musk, I think, and at least I do.
We or you. Exactly.
But one example...
I'm with him actually on this one. But he has the quotes lined up. I don't.
Yeah. But I think, he often speaks, Elon Musk is very much speaking about, pros of or a need for regulation in AI. And he compares it, for example, with the automotive or, the seatbelt. Before, in I guess 1950s or something, the whole automotive industry was really, really against the regulation of having seatbelts. To the point that it took 10 years and hundreds of thousands of people were killed because the cars didn't have seatbelts in them. And then finally, after a long time, people started to understand perhaps we should have seatbelts, and actually is a good thing. And it doesn't really hurt the industry that much that we have seatbelts. They will still sell cars. But then you can go, we can go to GDPR and whatnot. But would you agree with that? I guess it's kind of a leading question, but to just give
serving
that
it on a plate.
but do you think that kind of analogy between the automotive and seatbelt kind of regulations compared to AI regulation is useful in some way?
Yeah, and I mean, today there are a few players that truly uses AI. Yeah. What we've seen is a shift. I mean, many companies are now looking into, exploring how can we use AI in practice. So, with that comes that people or companies are now actually thinking about ethics. And that is super, super good. Ethics and regulation, we need to take it seriously. Because... Well, going back to Elon Musk,
please.
We can do something now to make sure that AI models, systems are transparent, are explainable, but we need actively to put resources into it. And I think that's super important to make sure that the models are fair and secure. And how we will do that, I mean, it's a super hard question. I've been following the work that the EU Commission is doing and the high-level expert group.
Right.
And I mean, they've come up with suggestions. I think some of them are good, but then you can have comments about it as well. But I think I have so much to say about this because sometimes it feels like people are desperate for regulation. And then we don't really know what regulation we need. And people tend to talk about AI as an object. It's not. Many people argue that it's a general purpose technology. Perhaps that's established now that it's like electricity.
Yeah.
And
you mean AI is a general purpose technology similar to electricity?
Yeah,
for like 100
exactly.
years ago
Yeah. So I mean, we can't talk about it like an object. And AI is math. You can't just forbid math.
So isn't this one of the key topics here now? If we want to talk about regulations in AI and ethics in AI, it requires a certain level of understanding before we understand how to regulate. And I think this is one of the key problems that the lawmakers sometimes, the regulators sometimes, they haven't really, they don't have this.
Oh my God, sorry.
The beer is spilling.
This was not on purpose. I must
okay,
say.
but
we need regulation on beer.
Yeah. But I think this is one of the things we are getting. I mean, like we have talked about this in other topics. In order to succeed with data and AI industrialization, we will need to understand intersectional innovation. We need to cross-pollinate whatever domain we are in with the data and AI domain.
Yeah.
So it then goes that you can't sit in the lawmaking domain and looking in from the outside on data and AI. You need to be exposed to it. You need to have experts. You need to work cross-functionally with people who can explain it to you. Because if you're on the outside looking in, you're not really understanding concretely what you're trying to regulate. That's my hypothesis.
And then we will get laws that are not fit for purpose.
That's the point, right? Or we will have good intentions like GDPR, but where the way we execute it has lost its meaning because we didn't really understand the purpose and how it could be done. And by the way,
that's debatable, I should say, though.
No, but
I mean, some people argue that GDPR is like a masterpiece.
No, but this is what I'm saying.
No, this is the topic to discuss.
Let's go here. Let's go here. Like, so we are talking about
masterpiece. I'm writing that.
Regulations fit for purpose. And now, do you see how it gets red now?
Yeah, exactly.
So GDPR might be a masterpiece.
You said before we started that I won't put you in the corner. I feel cornered now.
But this is your field.
Yeah.
This should be okay.
Yeah.
No, but I think this is interesting because maybe the fundamental way GDPR was intended and even how it's framed when you read the law text, it's fantastic. But then somewhere along the lines, we have tried to interpret what it means and how to execute it. And extremely convoluted processes or basically no to everything has started to emerge. So the way we have now decided to interpret and use GDPR, and I actually have a very good anecdote of this because I've been working at Vattenfall and I've been working with Scania, and they are both taking GDPR extremely seriously. They are super professional. They have big lawyering team looking at this, but they are fundamentally looking at it differently.
Yeah, but so...
which I find interesting then, right?
Yeah, but there is some interpretation issues when it comes to GDPR. Although it's like an EU law, that's problematic because...
But then it's not the masterpiece. Or could you do something that is not hard to interpret in these areas? Maybe that's even impossible.
So personally, I think that when it comes to AI and regulation... I don't believe in a regulation that is like fits everything, one size fits all.
No, that's really important to understand.
Yeah, so I think that we need to look at the effects and to be able to do that.
This is another quote actually, because I think this was the first time I heard it was actually from you. I think what should we regulate? Techniques or effects of techniques?
Yeah.
That's a profound statement, by the way.
Yeah. Can you just elaborate a bit more on that? Because I think that's an important understanding to have.
Important, yes, and also hard. Because, I mean...
So give an example. I can just give an example. So let's take face recognition. It's a technique. It can be used for different, number of different purposes. A lot of them potentially with harmful intention or implications, but potentially also positive implications. Then the option is, should you simply say face recognition is forbidden? Or should you say the application of using different types of face recognition applications is forbidden? Is that what you mean with the effects of techniques, or what did you mean when you said regulate the effects of techniques, not the techniques themselves?
So going back to the EU Commission's proposal, because one of the things they suggest is a risk-based approach.
Yes.
And I mean, that could be good, but it's also problematic because...
In so many ways.
In so many ways, yeah. Because, well, at least you need to assess what is risk, and also risk that could be, that could change over time. So applying AI in one sector may have these types of effects. Applying it in another sector could have other effects. So I think it's really, really hard. And basically, what I hope is that we will take the time to think this through, not rush to lay out the regulation, because then I think we will have something that is not fit for purpose. I think also perhaps we should think about soft law. I definitely think that
what is soft law? What do you mean with this?
So I think we need some type of regulation, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in terms of like EU law. We could have like codes, standards.
Codes of conduct.
Yeah, exactly. For example, in the construction and building environment, you have like codes and fackmannamässigt. Perhaps we can have that, and people will trust it, because if you don't have this certification, if you haven't followed the process, people won't trust you.
So there are many ways how we also can implement regulations, because sometimes maybe the lawyering text is not the problem. It's actually the implementation of things. And so from the statement of the text and then how we choose to interpret it very differently, and then from how we choose to implement it very differently.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also, if you just go back, take a step back and look at the law and regulation, the very foundation of it is based on that certain functions will always reside with humans. So for example, if you take the car replaced the horse from the very beginning. And now we're trying to replace the driver. And I mean, at least as I see it, the very foundation of law today hasn't really
changed from the horse even.
Perhaps not that bad. Actually, but I mean, it's actually philosophical questions.
Yes, and cool. But there's a couple of things here. You've said it before. Another way to give an example of this, regulating an effect or risk or something like that. We build recommender systems. And then some recommendations is to recommend which is the next song of music you should listen to. How if that screws up, what really happens, right? How do you regulate that? Versus, I will have recommender systems for the energy grid to basically balance the energy of a country, right? And if you screw that up, it is kind of a different ball game we're talking about. So for me, when we're talking about regulating the effects, it's a little bit like also regulations in relation to what's the business implication or societal implication or whatever we want to call it to get it right.
Just to clarify this a bit more, and it would be interesting to hear your opinion on this, Evelina. You brought up the EU regulation, especially the upcoming one, talking about high risk versus low risk AI, etc.
Although that's a proposal, that's still
upcoming, but in some form, probably.
Yeah,
but it's a direction where there is a direction.
I hope there will be some regulation. And I hope that...
but let's take the bad version that I've seen at least, which is not good. And then let's argue from that and see how we can improve it. And we don't know what will happen, right? But,
yeah.
But I think, and I hope you agree that, trying to regulate the effects of using something rather than the technology itself is good. Otherwise, you can simply say everything can be reduced to, if you take facial recognition, that's a technique. But if you use it to identify people to kill them for defense purposes, that's not a really good thing. So that's the application. And then you can say, they use facial recognition. Yeah, it's a technique. But that use AI. Yeah, that's a technique. But that use data. Yeah, that's a technique. Or they use math. Yeah. So that's if you try to regulate like a basic underlying technology, that's a dangerous thing to do. It should be application. But now I hope you can agree on that at least.
I fully agree on that. But now you said it even more sharp. Regulate on application rather than technique.
Yeah.
But one thing I think we're forgetting here, or not mentioning at least, is trust. Because we will need society's trust. And how do we achieve that? And I think regulation could be one thing. But then you have the second question, like, okay, so for like people in general, what do you need to understand about AI? Do you really need to understand how an AI model works? Like technically?
Yeah. So, okay,
perhaps not.